Hi guys, in this video I'm going to explain what default arguments are in C++. So let's start by creating a prototype called add, and let's say in my program sometimes I need to add 2 integers, sometimes 3, sometimes 4, and sometimes even 5. I could overload this function with other add functions that just expect a different number of integer arguments. Or another way is to use default arguments. And the way I do this, I first of all create all the parameters that I expect. So let's say I have up to A, B, C, D, E. And let's provide the implementation. I'm just going to copy this, paste it below, and return A plus B plus C plus D plus E. And I could call this from the main with add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, like I said, sometimes we don't want to calculate the sum of 5 integers. Sometimes we just want to compute the sum of 2 integers or 3 integers. So default arguments allows or are values that are provided by default, like the name said. So we don't pass those values in, they're just going to be initialized by default if I don't provide them. For example, say I call this add function with just 3 and 8, and that's it. I only provide 2 arguments here, 3 and 8. So those would map to the first 2 arguments, A and B. The other 3 here are left uninitialized, if you will. So we can change this by setting a default argument, by adding here equal. In this case I pick 0, and I do the same for the fourth parameter, equals 0, and the last one as well, equals 0. So these 3 have a default argument of 0. Now in this case here, where I just provide 3 and 8, 3 would be passed to A, 8 would be passed to B, and C, D, and E would all default to 0. So since I'm computing the sum, if I just add 0, it doesn't really change the result. I still get the proper result for this function call, and I didn't have to overload it with a bunch of other add functions just to accommodate this use case. Now I can also call it with 3 arguments, for example, 3, 8, 4. Or with 4 arguments, or in the first case, 5 arguments. Now, what I cannot do is, if I have different arguments, I cannot say I only want to provide C and D, but I want to skip the first 2. So depending on the function, for the add function here, it doesn't matter which one really I provide, but if you have more complex cases or other scenarios, it might matter. But you remember that for default arguments, you have to provide them in order, and you can just stop by not providing the remaining ones. So here I provided A and B, maybe C, and when I stop, it takes the default values. So you don't have the option to pick. I will just pick here D and E, and I want to have the default value for C and the ones before. You can only provide them from the beginning until some point, at which point the default values will take over. I hope this gives you an idea of how to use default arguments. Thank you for watching.